Hello, and good morning, everyone. I think everyone is more or less joined the next webinar from the Mortgage Marketing Forum. I'm delighted to have Ali Williams from Mark Making as our guest speaker today. He's going to be talking about brand distinction, and I'll introduce Ali in a minute. For those who don't know me, my name is Jeff Knight. I am one of the co-founders of the Mortgage Marketing Forum, along with Paul Hunt and Alex Hammond. And in case you're wondering, no, I've not been in a fight in a pub. I've just got some sort of allergy on my eyes at the moment, so I've not got any black eye. We've also got a number of non-forum members listening to Ali's speech today. So just wanted to have a quick 2-second overview on the Mortgage Marketing Forum in case you're not familiar with it. So myself, Paul and Alex set the forum up earlier this year, really with the goal of raising the profile of marketing within the mortgage market. And the people who belong to the forum currently come from all sorts of lenders, distributors, brokers, technology firms, conveyancing firms, and anyone who's actually connected to the mortgage market. And it's joined by marketing professionals and anyone who's actually got an interest in marketing. And our goal really, as I said, is to raise the profile of marketing in the industry and to connect marketing professionals and give a lot more thought leadership and help people share new ideas, listen to new ideas, and run several events, give thought leadership through content and so forth. So that's the Mortgage Marketing Forum. And one of the events we're doing is obviously today, which is all about brand distinction. And if you look at the market at the moment, it's extremely competitive. And as we go into next year, I believe it's going to get even more competitive. So brand distinction is probably more important than ever before. So as I mentioned, our speaker today is Ali Williams. So I've known Ali for a long, long time. Ali will probably introduce himself a bit more in a minute, but Ali is the co-founder of Mark Making, who some of you probably work with. Mark Making worked with a number of financial services clients, including people like Nationwide, Aldermore, Pepper Money, Gatehouse Bank, and most recently, Recognized Bank. Mark Making has won a number of awards over the years for campaigns, branding, and all sorts. And they've got some fantastic offices in the Cotswolds, and I think Ali will put me right here. Their offices was once the home of Ronnie Barker. So if any of you are quite young and you don't know who Ronnie Barker is, just ask your parents. So to kick things off, I'm now going to hand over to Ali, who will introduce himself and then talk to you about the value of brand distinction. Don't forget, questions will be held at the end. Ali's will talk for about 30 minutes, so please post all your questions in the Q&A button. Right, over to you, Ali.
Jeff, thank you very much. Now let me just see if I can share my screen. Jeff, can I just check that that is working and you can actually see, see my screen?
Brilliant.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jeff. Thanks for the intro, and thank you everyone for joining this morning. When Jeff first asked if I'd come and present one of these webinars, I was delighted to be asked, and then I had a minor panic, thinking, well, actually, what could I talk about for 30 minutes or thereabouts that would actually add some real value to marketers in the mortgage space? And I kept coming back to, I guess, what is the perennial challenge, as Jeff touched upon, for any business, any brand operating in a crowded marketplace, and that's how do you stand out? How do you get noticed? How do you become remembered? How do you create an air of remarkability? And that's where brand distinctiveness comes in, and the idea of distinctiveness sits at the heart of that. So that's what I'll be talking about. As Jeff said, 30 minutes, I think, is the allotted time, and then that will leave a little bit of time afterwards for some Q&A, and hopefully I'll be able to answer any questions that you might have. If we do run out of time on that front, I'd be very happy to pick up with any of you on that individually. So before we dive into it, I'm always wary about talking too much about mark making as an agency or myself in these situations, but the Mortgage Marketing Forum guys did suggest it would be a good idea, probably not least to give some sort of credence to what I'm talking about today. So I promise I'll keep it brief, and apologies in advance to any of you watching who already know me, which I believe there might be one or two today. So mark making, we've been going for 26 years now, a creative agency, and essentially what we do is we help create and build brands over the long term, and our disciplines are branding, communications, and campaigns. We work in a variety of sectors. Financial services is our heartland, but we've been very conscious over the years, not least for our own sanity, but conscious to work in lots of different sectors, because that way we are able to bring ideas, cross-fertilize ideas from very diverse industries, bring them into the likes of financial services, which I think is fair to say is generally behind the curve in lots of respects, but add value in that space. But it is really financial services where our heartland lies, and through the work that we've done over the years and the relationships that we've built, we've helped a number of brands become more successful, and in turn become successful ourselves. We were really, really pleased earlier in the year to win Marketing Partner of the Year at the British Bank Awards for the second year in running, which was a real honour. And other awards as well that relate very much to what we're talking about today. We won the B2B Marketing Awards for the Drum Recommends, and I think that was largely based on the B2B knowledge we have, and specifically within that an understanding of the intermediary market, which is of course relevant to you all today. As a business, we've always believed that we have a duty and a responsibility to have a positive impact on the world around us, to make the world a better place. And most recently, we've been trying to package that into something meaningful. Our own branding for it is Good Marks. But what we're doing, in fact, submitting this week, is our B Corporation application. It's taken us about 12 months to get there. If anyone's done it before, they'll know the work that's involved. If anyone's thinking of doing it, I'd highly recommend it. But be warned, it is a big commitment. We're hoping that in about 6 months' time, when the assessment should actually take place, we might be one of the highest ranking B corporations in our sector, in our space, if not the highest, which if we could do, I think would be something we'd be incredibly proud of. So I promised I'd keep it brief, and now we can get into the good stuff. I had an alternative title for the presentation today, as a title I've used before for a post I've written and another presentation I gave, and that was The Popular Art of Blanding and How to Avoid It. And I like it as a title, and I like the idea of blanding because it really explains and highlights one of the challenges that we face as marketers. If branding, the objective of branding is to create, stand out and get noticed in a noisy market, blanding is essentially what happens, or is the opposite of that, and it's what happens when actually a brand becomes part of that noise. And you can see it in lots and lots of different industries. A good example to demonstrate what I'm talking about is fintech. Pulled together a number of images from a number of companies, and quite clearly you can see that there are a number of common factors at play. The use of color down to the palette, even the treatment of the color, the use of solid flat colors, the use of imagery. If it's tech, let's show it on an iPad, let's show the app on an iPad. the use of typography, even a degree of similarity in the tone of voice when you look at the headlines. And I think what's possibly ironic, particularly in a space like this, is that a lot of these brands are positioning themselves as disruptors, the challengers, and yet for whatever reason, in fact, reasons we'll come on to, find themselves looking very much like their competition. And it's not restricted in any way to a handful of sectors. I think if you were to go away after the session today, pick a sector at random, do a little exercise in bringing together examples of the type of communications that are being put out there by those brands, and you'd see some common themes. During lockdown, quite a good example, perhaps like a few of you, we experimented quite a lot with home cooking kits, and a lot of them were really good. But if you ask me, that fantastic veggie tagine we had the other night, was it from HelloFresh? Was it a Simply Cook? Was it a Home Chef? Was it mine? I'd really struggle to remember, because it's another example of a category where the visual cues, the language, all starts to merge into one. It's really easy to criticize, but it happens a lot, and it does beg the question, why does it happen? And I think there are a number of reasons, a number of factors happening, playing a part at different levels. Brand design, communications, it's not just as we have trends and fashions in any other space, be it music, the fashion industry, literature, arts, whatever it might be. The same applies to the design world. There are definite distinct patterns that you see, approaches to design that become commonplace. More recently, I think we've seen, my view is that we've seen a big influence from the rise of UX as more brands start with a digital presence. Accessibility, user experience has become increasingly important, and much like cars in a wind tunnel, ultimately things are going to start looking the same. The shapes are going to be the same for cars. What's the most aerodynamic with design? What's the easiest to use? So there is definitely a conflict between the user experience and UX design and distinctiveness that has to be managed really, really carefully. But it also goes a little bit deeper than that. As human beings, we have a natural need, a desire, a want to belong. When we're not part of something, we feel uncomfortable. So blanding, albeit perhaps misguided, is understandable. Just last week, I was having a conversation with a prospective client, and they said, we want to look like Starling and Monzo. And I was thinking, actually, you need to do absolutely the opposite, and it's the role of the marketer to find ways to stand out from the pack, like this lonely penguin, as opposed to be part of it. And it's not easy to do. It requires a degree of courage. There are all sorts of barriers involved, but that is your mission as a marketer. And it's really important, and it presents a problem. And the problem is that there's an opportunity that's missed, and there's some terrific data out there. There's some great research to evidence that the power of difference. So in this research from Kantar and Brand Z, they looked at a number of brands, and based on how they were perceived in terms of how disruptive they were and how different they were, they looked at how their value changed over a period of 3 years. And those that were perceived as the most different and the most disruptive were the ones that demonstrated the most significant growth. In a similar study with the data from loyalty cards, it became very clear that brands that were considered to be different and meaningful in this instance, people were prepared to pay more money for. They were they were happy to spend more on brands. And what's really interesting about this is that these aren't fundamentally different brands from each other. They're just perceived as different. And that's the really important thing to remember here, which brings us on to this question of distinctiveness versus differentiation, because at face value, both of these things could be confused as being the same. You know, they do require a little bit of explanation. So by way of explanation, differentiation, that has been, historically, marketing has focused on the need to be different. That has been at the core of marketing. And underpinning that is an understanding of how you are going to position yourself within a market, the story that you're going to tell. So in mortgage intermediary marketing, that differentiation might come from criteria, it might come from price, it might come from a distribution strategy, it might come from market focus, but it is a measurable difference in some way in which that you can market yourself against. By contrast, distinctiveness, which is a much newer phenomenon, I say a newer phenomenon, only by name, but we have seen this real rise in popularity. And actually, in some respects, there are two camps. There are those who believe that it's all about differentiation, and those who believe that it's all about distinctiveness. My view, the view of mark making as well, is that you absolutely need both. So if differentiation is fundamentally about how you are different, distinctiveness is about how you stand out. It's about how easily you come to mind, the mind of your target audience, your consumer, and also how elements of your identity, how readily they are attributable to you and your brand. So how readily you are recognized as you. And the reason they're both important is because when you look at a buying journey, there are very distinct phases. If you look at a purchase funnel, we talk about awareness, we talk about consideration, we talk about preference, we talk about purchase, etc. So to win the race, you've got to be in it. A great analogy I heard is if you want to be, you know, if you're potentially the fastest person over 100 meters in the world, nobody's going to know that unless you make it to the qualifiers. And it's the same with brands. If your brand isn't mixing it up in a consideration set, then you're never going to be the chosen brand. So you need to be there in the first place, you need to qualify, and then that's when the differentiation piece kicks in. That's when a decision will be made on, do I go with this brand over that brand? What was my previous experience of that brand like? I guess, again, if we're talking mortgage intermediary, the last time I spoke to a broker, how did that go? How quickly was my case resolved? Were they able to flex in some way on criteria? So that's the differentiation part, but it only happens after you've come to mind. At the heart of distinctiveness is this idea of assets, distinctive assets. So essentially, distinctive assets, or codes, as they're sometimes called, are proxies or substitutes for the brand name. So you see or hear or smell or feel an asset, and you instantly know the brand name. That's the goal there. So with that in mind, they come in all forms. So we might immediately think of logos and colors, but they could be people. It could be a clever strap line. It could be the shape of something, particularly in FMCG, where there's product and packaging is a big part of it. It might be a sound. It even could be the overall style of advertising. I always think HSBC did a good job of that. You'd instantly recognize the border and the little indent that's come from the logo shape and the use of white and red, etc. And it could be characters. And if any of you subscribe to Marketing Week, there was an article just recently, which I might refer to a little bit later on as well. A colleague shared it with me earlier this morning that talked very much about the potential to use characters more within B2B as distinctive assets. But just to show you how powerful they can be, we have a little quiz. I'd love to say there are prizes, there aren't. All you're playing for here is the sheer satisfaction of getting every single answer right, which I'm pretty convinced you'll do. If you are feeling competitive, by all means, key in the brand name as I share the asset into the messaging, and we'll see who's quickest on the draw. But let's go through them. So the first asset, easy. Some of you might know the story, but the original brief for the Coca-Cola bottle was that I want a bottle shape that can be recognized broken and in the dark. That was the creative brief. This was the answer, and it is truly iconic now and instantly recognizable as a brand asset. When a group of people from the agency that created the Meerkat got together, you know, they understood what distinctiveness was all about. Insurance, how do we fundamentally differentiate from our competitors? We can't really. There's not a lot we can do, but we can be distinctive. Market sounds like Meerkat. Why don't we create a Russian Meerkat? Genius. But it's worked for them, and instantly recognizable. You see this character, you think of the brand name. The Nike swoosh, again, an easy one, but so simple, so immediately recognizable, you don't need to see the brand name. Technically, I'm not brilliant, so I refrain from putting some sound into this presentation. My best attempt at this would be da-da. It's a sound that you might hear quite often. It occurred to me not long ago when we were firing up Netflix that it's an instantly recognizable sound, and again, a really good example of a brand asset. People often cite things like Intel Inside as a good example. I just think more recently, this is one that stands out for me. And it can be lines as well. We read love it or hate it, and everybody knows who that is. Hopefully you are putting these into the chat, but that's Marmite, and it stood the test of time. You don't need to see the name, you don't need to see the jar, although the jar would probably be another very good example of a distinctive asset. The line does the job it needs to do. A very popular fast food chain. I think what's really interesting about this example is the choice of location. You're driving along a motorway. Actually, what can you process very quickly? It's actually easier to process these shapes and colors and know the brand than it is to read the name. And interestingly, if you were to take off the yellow or the gold, I should say, or use the gold in a different way, i.e. not a section of the logo, it might not be so quite so obvious. So the point here is actually distinctive assets can be a combination of elements. In fact, color in isolation is incredibly hard to own and make a valuable asset from, but combinations of color and in conjunction with shape can be really powerful. Smell. Walking down a high street, you can normally detect a Lush store a good few shops before you actually get there. Likewise, Hollister, White Company do a pretty good job, you know, playing to olfactory senses. Body Shop were probably the first with all of this, but it just illustrates that even smell can be a distinctive asset. Color. This just as a bit of a story to this particular example. I think it was Age UK that Cadbury's got involved with it, and as part of a campaign to tackle loneliness amongst older people. The creative idea was to donate the words from their packaging. And they could do that because the purple is so immediately distinctive and recognizable as either Dairy Milk or Cadbury's. I'm not sure. Probably Cadbury's, but it's also identifiable as Dairy Milk as well. And interestingly, they probably could have gone all purple, but actually what they've done is they've introduced a little bit of differentiation as well, because the glass and a half illustration says something about their chocolate and the use of milk. Oops. So we've got a collection there, and the idea is of showing these, and I guess I'm assuming you got them all right. I hope you got them all right. This is the tricky thing with webinars. You can't see people's faces, you can't hear what's going on, but I'm guessing you got all of those right. And probably what you will have observed as well is that they are multisensory. You know, this isn't just about visual design. They're also really flexible. You can use different things in different contexts. You can adapt them to different media environments, and really importantly, they have creative potential. So the best examples find ways to reinvent their asset, not drop it because they're bored, but reinvent it, bring it to life in a new way that's going to resonate either with their existing audience or broaden appeal. So another question, what makes a strong distinctive asset? And the real pioneers in this space in terms of research and the academic side of this are the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. They're based in Australia. You can read a lot more about them and their work if you just Google them. Others look at it, but the model the Ehrenberg Bass Institute has, I particularly like for its simplicity. And when they're evaluating the strength of a distinctive asset, there are two aspects to consider: the fame of the asset and its uniqueness. So the fame is actually how readily it's recognized. So if, for example, you were to show them that the meerkat to 100 people, how many people would identify it as belonging to an insurance company? Then of those 100 who at least put a name, a brand name to the asset, how many of them actually got it right? And that would determine how unique your asset is in that particular space. So the holy grail, or the objective, the goal in all of this is to have 100% fame and 100% uniqueness. So you see something much like the examples that I just shared. You see a combination of yellow and gold and a shape in a particular way, and you know instantly that that's McDonald's. You see the Coke bottle shape, you know instantly that that's Coke. So getting a huge amount of fame and also being recognized, knowing that that attribute is attributable to you is really, really important. But you might find that the assets you have fit into different areas. So for example, fame might be really high, but it's not uniqueness. So there's a color, it's black, for example, and if you ask 100 brokers to write down the mortgage lender that uses that color, they can probably all write something down. How many of them will write the same thing is probably a completely different question, and it's likely that the uniqueness that it's, or rather it's attributed, that particular color is attributed to a host of different brands and not attributed to the one that we were hoping it would be attributed to. So if you're high fame but you're low uniqueness, you probably want to avoid it with that asset. If you have high uniqueness, so actually a number of people identify it as an asset as belonging to you, but not that many people recognize it in general, there's some potential there, because what you can do is you can start investing in the fame, and you can start putting money and creative thinking behind how can we move what we have as a very unique asset into a famous space as well. And if you're neither famous or unique, and then you probably don't want to do much with it at all. So if you're looking at your own brand, you can go through an exercise. You can start thinking about, okay, what are our brand assets? What are our codes? What have we actually got? Have we got any? If so, which of those do we think are working well? Which of those might have more potential we could do more with? And in general, does our palette of assets need broadening? Are we missing something? Perhaps we don't have anything that fits in that investment space or is anywhere approaching 100% fame and 100% uniqueness. So these are the questions you need to be asking yourselves. This whole concept of distinctiveness and the work that the Ehrenberg Bass Institute do is predominantly focused on B2C, and as you'll have seen from some of the examples I've given, bigger household names, but there is definitely potential and relevance to smaller brands and also B2B brands. And I wanted to share an example that I thought illustrated this point really well. And the story begins mid-2000s, I think, around about 2006. We were working for the Mortgage Works, who we continue to work with, and the then marketing director that some of you may remember, but she'll go nameless, said just off the cuff, I don't like orange. And it illustrated one of the biggest challenges that you as marketers have when it comes to creating distinctiveness, because people with influence come and go, and they want to make their mark on a situation, and often that means assets that have potential are dropped and opportunities are missed. So you really need to fight your corner and adopt that, the moniker of the brand guardian in the fullest sense. So we were presented with this challenge, which we promptly ignored. And I'm not even sure how we managed to ignore it, but I think we put together a case to say that that's actually something we really ought to contain, because actually branding isn't a subjective matter, it's objective, and you need to be strategic about it. And the mortgage works, as I'm sure lots of you will be familiar with, uses orange pretty consistently. And when we look over, the past 15, 16 years, the identity hasn't changed dramatically. The characters remain, they've been evolved, but the color palette, the use of orange, the use of white, the use of black is still there. And it may just be that the characters have been really important and fundamental to the success of the brand, because the Mortgage Works is probably an example of a brand that works really hard to differentiate, but the reality of the situation is differentiating in the mortgage lending, intermediary mortgage lending space is pretty challenging. There are very few things that you can do that are defendable, that can't be replicated quickly and easily by your competition. With the Mortgage Works, they've always worked hard to support brokers. They've been there through the crunch. They, as and when new regulatory legislations are introduced, the Mortgage Works have always been very quick to provide guidance and support materials to help guide and navigate their brokers through some of those new challenges. So they do have an element of their proposition which is fully focused on making brokers' lives easier. But what they've also done well is to remain distinctive. And if I suspect some of you are familiar with the work, the research work of BVA BDRC, they run an ongoing study. It's a syndicate, so you need to subscribe to it. And if you're interested, Mark Long is the person to talk to. But they look at different brands and how they perform. And one of the metrics for performance is acronym UPWATER, or unprompted willingness to recommend, and it links in with recall. And so one of the tests that are carried out, a logo will be covered up on a piece of communications, and can the communication still be attributed to a particular brand? And the Mortgage Works has consistently outperformed and been mixing it up in the one first or second place slot for a number of years now. And that is due to a combination of a focus on differentiating and finding every opportunity to differentiate, but also religiously sticking to a strategy of distinctiveness. And that just about brings me to the end of the presentation, and hopefully there's a few key takeaways that will be of use to you all. Be bland at your peril. As I've illustrated, the opportunity to be distinctive is very easily, it's actually very easy to realize, and it's really important. It's fundamental to commercial success, but don't do it in absence. It's not about taking your eye off the ball of being different. It's just putting some time and effort into thinking about how you stand out, and you can be very strategic with both. As I illustrated a little bit earlier, when you're looking at your own distinctive assets, you need to get to the heart of what's working and what's not, and of course where there's potential for gain. And as a rule of thumb, the point at which you're bored of an asset is probably the point at which you should be using it more and investing in it. So resist that urge. You really do have to defend your brand. New CEOs, new marketing directors, the appeal of the new and the novel can be really, really alluring. But the strongest brands stick religiously to what they know gives them a distinctive edge. As a process, you can certainly start looking at this yourselves. Obviously, we'd be delighted to help any of you on that process. There are really kind of 4 phases to it. the audit, understanding effectively where you are now, where are your strengths, what are your strongest assets, do you have any strong assets? Then looking at a strategy, where should you be investing and focusing in order to build distinctive assets. Then there's a phase of creativity of what we have, what can we develop, what could we use differently, what could we refresh, what could we revitalize, are there different ways that we could bring some of these assets that are working for us to life. And of course, as with all marketing, if you're not measuring it, it's not going to be working. So you need to keep an eye on what is working and go back to that audit, go back to that strategy. Are the things that we're focusing on, are they becoming more noticed? Has their fame risen? Are they identified now as being unique? So that's it from me. As I say, I'm very happy to take any questions now or from individuals at any point. But I think what I need to do now is stop sharing and go back to Jeff in the studio. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Ali. This is a very strange studio I'm in today. I have to say that was a first-class presentation, so thank you.
Thank you.
Fortunately, I can't ask for a round of applause because you won't hear it. So as Ali said, if you've got any questions, please ask them through the Q&A at the bottom of your screens. But just to kick things off, Ali, I've got a two-part question for you. Listen to what you're talking about. Number one is, do you think there is too much blanding, as you call it, within the mortgage market, whether it be lenders, brokers, or whatever? And secondly, do you think the thing that stops people really becoming distinctive, using distinctiveness in their brand? Because I think most people on this call were probably thinking, yes, I totally agree with you, Ali, but how do I go and do that? I need to be brave. My company needs to be brave to do that. Do you think people take the easy path, which is, going back to your penguin scenario, let's just stay part of the herd and be safe and not stand out? Do you think so? Yeah. So do you think there's a lot of blanding, and to make this happen, you have to be brave as marketers and as organizations?
Yeah, good questions, Jeff. I think the first part of that, is there too much blanding? I think actually the problem is there's too much changing as a sector on the whole, and obviously it's quite a niche space within financial services. Lots of the brands do have the potential to create that distinctiveness, but what we tend to see is brands changing and adopting new assets almost too readily. So the brands, I think the Mortgage Works is a good example. We could have changed that, love it or hate it, as an identity. It's worked because we've been consistent. Things have been revitalized, things have been refreshed, but we've stuck to it. And I think it's having the courage of conviction to know that it's worth committing to assets over the longer term. And as far as the second question, which was again, Jeff, I forget.
It's all about the need to be brave.
Oh yeah, I mean that's the biggest challenge with all of this. And I think then for a marketer, it's about educating those people who are likely to put the kibosh on consistency and exploring the potential and investing in the right assets by educating them as to why it's just so important, and finding examples, and lots of examples, from outside of this industry to illustrate that point. But it is really difficult because, we're curious by nature, we're attracted to the new and the novel, we want to change things. And when you've got personnel changing, a new marketing director with different ideas, they want to be seen to do something differently. It takes, use the word courage, and it's right. It takes a lot of courage and commitment to stick to things that are working and know that you should be doing that. And actually, if there's an argument to say, well, how do we? You need to apply creativity to what you have. KFC in the States, they took Colonel Sanders and they completely reinvented it. They got different celebrities dressing up as that character. They did a Chippendale stripper ripoff for Valentine's of all kind. You can find ways to revitalize the assets that you have.
Cool, okay. Well, we've got a couple of questions coming through the stream. So Jack Murphy's asked, how do you suggest balancing trying new assets against maintaining consistency?
Yeah, also a really good question. I think you have to know where you are now. So you have to look at your assets. Whether ideally you want to engage in some sort of research that puts, and the research can be really simple. It's visual cue based. So you put a visual cue in front of a sample of 100 of your audience. Perhaps in this case, it's mortgage brokers. You show them you show them an asset that you have. It might be a color, it might be a character, it might be a line, and you'll quickly see how many of that sample assign a name to that asset, and what percentage of those assign your name to that asset. So you can quickly find out where you are now in terms of the assets that you have. And if you have any that have real potential, then you need, or are high in fame and high in uniqueness, you need to be investing more in them. If you find that actually there's nothing, and all your assets are floating around in that kind of low fame, low uniqueness space, then that's the time to try something new. But you can't expect it to build fame overnight. You have then to invest in creating its fame, and be realistic about the time frame in which you need to do that. So to answer the question, find out if you have anything now that has the potential to be a truly distinctive asset, and if you don't, then think about how you could create one.
Yeah, okay. So a couple of questions also that are quite related, actually. So from Dush Patel and Alex Hamid, and I think this might end up being a separate topic through the forum, but this is all about, it goes back to the point about being brave. How do you convince your CEO and the rest of the exec team that this is important when really marketing is often seen as the colouring in department? I know we're being a bit flippant here, but it is a challenge for, I mean, this comes back time and time again from the forum members that, getting that, their own internal brand, if you like, the power of marketing.
Yeah, I think unfortunately for a lot of brands in this space, marketing is seen more as an administrative function than a strategic function. And very rarely, some of the startups that we work with, you look around the board table and there's nobody flying the flag for building a brand or marketing. So it's a deeper rooted issue, I think, that's at play here. So it generally comes back to the business case. There's the added challenge, isn't there, of everybody thinks they're a marketer. So again, that the role of the marketing department, the onus is on them to demonstrate and evidence the importance of marketing and marketing strategy. So what tends to happen is administrative functions, probably a bit harsh, but at best it becomes a tactical function. And if you look at the work of Binet and Field, who've done a lot of research into this, the brands that build equity do it by getting the optimum combination of that short-term sales-focused activity and the longer-term brand building activity, which is about imbuing your brand with a degree of emotion and meaning that people respond to. But it's really hard. Back to why is it so difficult? The short-term gains of the tactical activity are really easy to see, and marketing, certainly sales teams, are motivated by monthly, quarterly, yearly targets, when actually you need to be thinking 5 years or 3-5 years ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Another question here about is from Zoe Robson about how important are employees, because this is a really important question here, because if you think about the value, the importance of brand is everything you do and everything you say, and you'll say the same thing. Brands are built from within. So how important are employees outside of the marketing team for contributing towards a distinctive and differentiated brand?
Yeah, massively important. You know, as you rightly say, brand is a inside out exercise. If your employees don't understand the brand positioning and the brand story, then you can't really expect your audience to, your external audience to either. And actually, if you can, the potential to create advocates from your employees is really huge, and what all businesses should be pursuing. But it's a really good point, because it's not just about educating the leadership team or the board as to the value of brand and marketing. It's about educating the whole business. So finding ways for, you know, most of the marketing departments are really quite tiny, might be a handful of people. You know, there are exceptions, obviously, like Nationwide and so on, but most of them aren't big departments. But if you can find ways to engage adjacent departments, maybe start with the sales team, which could be a bit of a challenge, but get them on board with the fundamentals of marketing and go broader from there, then your chances of encouraging, you know, cultural change and getting the whole organization to understand that the business needs to be market orientated, consumer orientated, and not product orientated becomes a lot easier to do. But it's not a straightforward challenge.
Just I want to go back to one of your slides where you showed the unprompted willingness to recommend, because I'm a great advocate of that research. I've been using it for donkey's years. I always found starting with sort of metrics like that is really good, actually quite a powerful way to just see change in your organization, because then you're starting with the data rather than I've had an idea, if that makes sense. So just wondered, have you ever used that type of data to position your concepts and thoughts about shifting brands?
Well, I mean, I also know Mark quite well, and we talked about whether we need to build into some of these studies more of a specific look at this idea of distinctiveness, because to date it's probably been caught up in looking at other metrics, and almost we're trying to filter out some evidence from non-specific research to support this idea of distinctiveness. But I think it's in there. It's in there amongst some of the activities like recall, as I mentioned, being able to present a piece of marketing in the absence of the brand name, and for somebody to be able to readily identify that and attribute that to the correct brand name is all part of distinctiveness. So I think there's definitely scope to be more proactive in measuring, building in some sort of distinctiveness measure into some of that activity.
I just also just let the group know that Richard Farr has been putting together a number of thoughts on the Q&A of interest. So Ali, you know Richard, could you just give Richard a wave? I think he's feeling a bit unloved.
Hi Richard.
And we had a question in advance from Simon Dodd at the commentary. Now you may have actually answered this, but this is all about differentiating your brands in a competitive market, because from experience, it's very difficult to differentiate through products and so forth, very commoditized. So do you think it's the key, you talked about it in your slide, is all about the storytelling and also, but more importantly, the strategic positioning? If you don't do the positioning work, it's very hard to differentiate your brands.
Yeah, I mean, the positioning is your start point. So, understanding with absolute clarity who you are for and why it matters to them. It's a problem solution thing. So understanding your consumer's problem, then demonstrating and dramatizing how it is that you, the benefits that are derived from your service in order to meet that, how your service addresses that problem and the solution you provide is all part of that positioning piece. And you need to look at the needs and wants of your consumers. You need to look at what your competition are doing, and you need to look at how you can meet those needs and wants of your audience in a way that your competitors don't. So it starts with that, and from there, and that can be quite functional. You can articulate that in a really functional way. When that translates to a story, you're looking at how can we tell this now in a way that really amplifies that position and brings it to life in a way that's compelling. The reality is, as we've said, in a lot of these markets, actually the measurable, meaningful differences between the product or service are marginal at best, and they're not easy. They're not easy to defend. They're easily replicated, which is why we've seen this recognition in the value of distinctiveness. So alongside differentiation, work really hard at just standing out.
Okay. And I think we've got one final question that came on the feed beforehand, which was from Zoe Robson again, which is the question's all about: is there a difference between keeping your brand consistent versus homogenizing that brand?
So we always ask the tricky question. I think consistency is absolutely integral to creating distinctiveness. You have to be consistent with your assets. And actually the goal of that, by being consistent with those assets, is that you don't become homogenous. You're actually heterogeneous, and you stand out within your marketplace. So I guess consistency and homogeneity, we're talking about them in slightly different ways. Your brand needs to be consistent in order to be distinctive, and you need to be distinctive in order to stand out and not be homogenous.
Okay, marvelous.
Does that answer your question, Zoe? She'll tell me later, I'm sure.
Okay. We'll find out later. So I think we've got no more questions. I would say, to sum up, I mean, I'll let you sum up a bit better than I would, but it's very clear then in this market, it's about who you are. You need to differentiate yourself, and you need to be distinct. You need to be the two things. And to be able to do this, you've got to have a sense of bravery and a belief in the reasons behind it. So it's not a case of just doing it because you want to do it. There has to be a guided belief and rationale, backed up by stats and insight to deliver all this.
Yeah, or in other words, Jeff, we should more of us should wear shirts like yours.
Yeah, then I wouldn't be distinct, would I? So yeah.
No, that's a really good summary. They're both really important, and hopefully that buying journey illustrated that as well. The differentiation in a marginal market really comes into play once you're in that consideration set, and to be in that consideration set, you've got to come to mind, and that's the role of distinctiveness. Okay,
brilliant. Okay, well, I think that very much concludes this presentation. I thought that was actually first class, Ali. So thank you much for your time.
Very much. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
If anyone thinks of any questions afterwards, sometimes that happens during the course of the day, just drop us an email, and I can pass it on to Ali. If you want his details, will pass it on to you. So once again, Ali, thank you very much for your time.
That's a pleasure. Thanks very much. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, have a good day, everyone.
Thanks.